welcome back to this week's workshop training series. Today with me is Ted Cadigan, YMCA of Newfoundland Labrador's business consultant, and we're going to be focusing on identifying and engaging your customer base. Thank you, Ted. Welcome.
Thank you, Ian.
So before we get started, I just want to talk a bit about the CNA Entrepreneurship Initiative and a couple of different things that we're up to. So as you can tell today, one of the things we're really getting off the ground is entrepreneurship workshops. And we're fortunate enough to have Ted Cadigan and the YMCA partnering with us on delivering a series of these workshops. Another thing we're going to be focusing on is CNA podcast. CNA Entrepreneurship podcasts are really going to focus on student and alumni entrepreneurs, talking about their story, how they got started, and just a couple of different tips and tricks about what worked for them and what didn't in business. Next, we have a entrepreneurship competition. So in the fall of 2023, we're going to be launching our first entrepreneurship competition. That's going to be a cross-province CNA competition open to students. Next, we also have the CNA Entrepreneurship Hub. So there's tons of great tools and supports on our new Entrepreneurship Hub for anyone looking to start a business, looking to have an idea, don't know where to go, get some resources in financial terms or marketing terms, pretty much anything. So there's tons of great resources on there you can avail of. So that's a little bit about us. I'll hand the reins over to Ted, and you can start sharing your screen whenever you're ready, Ted.
Awesome. Ian, thank you very much. So for context for the group, and welcome, this session was delivered approximately a week ago, I would say, to a live audience without the recording components, so that individuals in the space had the opportunity to share their business ideas, collaborate on stories, and build a network. So we want you to know that this is I'll say, dual approach Ian and I are taking, where we're going to do a live session that's not recorded, so it's a more private, confidential space, and then we relay the information about 7 to 10 days later in this, I'll say, strictly presentation style. So if you want to be in on the successive workshops that are coming, that's the approach. It's my belief that the ones where there's a collaborative, reactive space are probably more valuable. You build your network, you get to interface with myself and Ian on how we can adjust our resources to meet your needs, but this service is always available as well. So before I get into the content today, I want to give you a Coles Notes version of the WISE relationship with entrepreneurs right now. My name is Ted. I'm the senior business consultant in our employment, enterprise, and newcomer services area at the Y, specifically responsible for all things related to enterprise, or as a synonym for entrepreneurship. We provide cost-free, commitment-free business consulting services that range from networking and training to one-on-one business plan development support. We're with you through that process, and we work with our partners like Ian. So that's the brief touch on how I can help beyond this presentation, and we'll talk about contact info after the fact, or it might get baked into this video. Moving on, I'm going to share my screen now, hoping, and I'll wait for the thumbs up from you, Ian, that everyone can see my screen. We're all good? Excellent.
All good.
Excellent, excellent. Let me make a little adjustment here. Perfect. So, first thing I want to touch on is that this is not the first in the series. You'll see we've already been through an introduction to services, a walkthrough of where we're headed in terms of the 5-part workshop series that Ian and I are building, and then we get into 2 weeks ago's and last week's content. So I'm going to click through this, and actually I'm going to click through it a little slower so you can see what we worked on, where we're headed, some of the reasons and rationale somebody would develop a business plan, talking through, and this is the interpersonal version of why we might work together, moving into the content, talked about our products, talked about development of your concept, to your point of differentiation, and recapped. Now, I know that wasn't the purpose of today, because hopefully this has been your journey through multiple videos. The goal is to talk about customer bases. This is going to be fairly term heavy, and Ian, if you see things that I say that might not be intuitive or implicit for the reader, let me know, throw a hand up, and you'll be my surrogate audience for the day, if that works for you. Awesome. Okay, so the first thing I want to touch on is the difference between a customer and a consumer. In this context, a customer is the individual purchasing the product or service, and the consumer is the individual interfacing with or physically using the product or service. And I want to touch on the fact that those can often be the same person. heard me, Ian, talk at length about some basic ideas like a sandwich shop. The majority of people come in, they're the customer, they pay cash, they're the consumer, they literally consume the sandwich. But it's important to recognize that when you're teasing out who your customers are, that those aren't always the same person. Think of a toy store, or think of a lot of business-to-business interactions, where the customer, in the toy store analogy, is the individual making the purchase, but the consumer is the child or the person with the parent or guardian that is interfacing with the store. They're engaged with the colors and branding. Their products are at their eye level. So you need to be aware of the tolerance and preferences of your customer and of your consumer. We touched on not only that basic toy store analogy, but think of business-to-business interactions as well, where a lot of people are often purchasing goods or services for their business with the intent not to use them to facilitate their day-to-day work, but to provide them to customers of that business, in other words, consumers. So there are a few lenses where you can tease out the difference between customers and consumers. And if you're writing a business plan, this is an important point of differentiation. Moving on, I want to talk through how you might identify customers or consumers. The first thing you might look at is their geographic, demographic, or discernible differences. Meaning, you first need to define the geography that your customers or consumers operate within. Because that's going to correlate with your marketing. It's going to coordinate with any delivery services you put forward. It's going to coordinate with the capacity of your business to support a region. So you need to know where and in what area your customers live, work, and interface with your business. That could be multiple places. That could be a very broad space, or it could be something very geographically specific. And I'm tasking you with identifying the geographic region in which your customers live and operate. Because once you have that information, you can tease out the sum total of people in your target customer area and then build the breadth of your services based on that. Let's use an analogy. If you're in RV sales and you're operating and promoting only on the Avalon Peninsula, and you identify that out of the sum total population of the Avalon Peninsula, there are 5,000 core customers, and you expect to find 10% of them as your core audience. Those are your captive consumers. Okay, so that's in an ideal world or a perfect competition. That's 500 RVs. You buy 15, or if you buy 15,000, there's a discrepancy there. And it's because you didn't do your due diligence on the geographic description of your customer or consumer base. That's number one. Demographic information relates to that previous example because demographic information are the traits, characteristics, or commonalities that your customers hold. What makes your core customer base stand out relative to the general population? Is it individuals over the age of 18, under the age of 60? Are they predominantly male identifying or female identifying individuals? Are they in a certain income bracket? Do they have a certain family size? Do they have a specific trait about their purchasing patterns? Perhaps they inherently have to be homeowners to be your captive audience. Maybe they have to be business owners. Whatever allows you to refine or whittle down that funnel so you've got a core target customer base, it's going to be really important. And then beyond that, we're going to talk about some of the more intangible components of their behaviors. Those are your discernible or definable traits. For example, their spending habits, availability and alignment of your services hours relative to their needs. How do they move throughout their day? For example, are they employed? Are there any complementary actions or interactions that they have? This is you putting yourself in the shoes of the customer and saying, how do I align what I provide with their interest in interfacing with my business? Well, oftentimes, once you're combining these things, you'll see people produce avatars, or they'll produce sample singular customers that are representative of their customer segment, or their multiple customer segments, so that the reader of their business plan says, okay, Todd is not a real person, but Todd's reality is being explained and his relationship with my business is being explained as an easy, or I'll say palpable way to connect your aspirations for who your customer is with the reader. We're with me so far, Ian? Making sense?
Yeah, most definitely. I think that's a really interesting point too, having that avatar, because
Sure.
it just helps people really narrow down that audience and their customer base a bit more. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and I've often seen people use that avatar as a surrogate walkthrough of the process of interfacing with the business. Like I've seen it right down to when people get into their operation and startup considerations. And in the example extended, Todd has a dispute with management, and they talk through the process of that coming to an amicable resolution. Or Todd has a warranty claim, and then what's the process for Todd receiving an email back? So it becomes this like human walkthrough that gives some clarity for the reader of how the business owner is expecting the customer or consumer to interface with the business. And if we get into one of those businesses where there's a discrepancy between customer and consumer, sometimes they'll do two. You know, we might have, I don't know, Sadia and their child, or the person for which they're responsible. And then those two people in the toy store business plan work together in relation to the business. It's not necessarily required, but it can help tell the narrative, especially if you're building a business plan, that you're not just presenting in terms of a written document, but you actually have to speak to in a meeting.
Yeah, it's a fantastic way to do it.
Yeah, try it out, right? And most importantly, try it out after you speak to the person with whom you're presenting the plan. So if they hate that idea, that's fine. Everyone's got a different way they want to work with your business. Just another tool in your tool belt.
There you go.
Okay, love it. We're going to move on to beyond demographic, geographic, and trait-based information, how you might catalog your customers further. Because those systems don't always work for people, especially if it's in an online business where there's a lot of ambiguity about where a purchase might take place, if there's international or national reach. So we're going to talk about cataloging by product and cataloging by availability. So what that means. First off, and I'm just going to read this right off the slide so we can start from a standard space. List the things you provide and tease out your customers based on that. That's for products. What that means is you might have a specific skill set or opportunity related to a product or service. For example, you got a great deal on, who knows, a commercial size lot of deep freezes, toys, doesn't matter, pick the product. There's an opportunity that's presented to you where you have a specific skill set. Like you're a chiropractor, you're a physiotherapist, you're a welder, you're a carpenter, you're a painter, it doesn't matter. That product or service then becomes finite. You have to reference who your customer base is based on the previous information around what you offer, because that's not going to change. You can mold it and present it through marketing differently, but the core of the product-based customer cataloging is saying, what I offer at this time in this space has limitations. I need to find out who I'm supporting. Then you can catalog customers in another avenue by availability, where you list and investigate the things that you believe customers need, and you tease out your product based on that. So in this example, you have a captive, capable, and interested customer audience. You have a base of people that you feel you could provide services to. Maybe you live in a rural community. Maybe there's a one-off opportunity that you want to leverage as a business owner, like a music festival or a gathering of people in a beach during the season. You have to look at trends around where they are going to be, who they are, and how they behave, and moderate your services or products based on that. A really common positive example is a seaside or beachside food or fish truck, where you need to, that population on that beach for the last 20 years, seasonally, of course, is probably pretty static. You might see some uptick in population on that beach. It might go down. But you need to get some observations about what's happening in that environment, and then adjust your business offerings based on that. If you have information on who's been on that beach for the last 10 years, or you talk to locals, you talk to municipalities about what happens seasonally in that region, and you're putting up a food truck, what you learn should align with your purchasing patterns and inventory stock, and your operating hours, your opening day, your closing day, your branding, your specials, your promotions, depending on the age and demographic of who you're working with. So sometimes you have a finite product or service that you need to modify how you approach your customers around. And sometimes you have a captive audience that you need to align your business operations with. So those are two ends of the same spectrum. One reacts to the other, and then vice versa. So that's a bit of a inaction part of this, or process planning part. Cool. Now, you're going to see me reading out the slides more because I'm getting into a bit of a list here, and I don't have the list memorized. But I want to elaborate on and tease further into the customer identification process. And I'm remiss in not telling you that there's alternative terms for consumer and customer, or customer and consumer, because you'll hear those referred to as primary customer and secondary customer. That means person buying the product, person or service, and person using the product or service. I meant to tell you that earlier. I didn't, but it's a helpful point to say. You'll see ambiguity in language throughout entrepreneurship and business development all the time, in templates, in conversations between institutions, and you've got to be prepared for that. And you've got to be okay asking honest questions, because you probably have a term that describes what the other individual is talking about, and it takes confidence to say, I don't think we're on the same page in terms of the language we're using. I want to clarify for you what I'm describing when I say this and see if it aligns with what you're saying. Perfect example is customer versus consumer and primary versus secondary customer or consumer. Make sense? Excellent. So, number one, identify those things. That's what you need to know. Number two, is this a business to consumer, or you'll hear referred to as B2C business, or is this a business to business business, otherwise referred to as B2B? So whenever possible, I'm going to try to mitigate the jargon we use or explain it to you, because you're probably new to entrepreneurship. So you'll hear people talk about B2B or B2C, and it just means, do you sell to an individual, or are you selling to a business that's probably later down the road selling to an individual? Then, what are the needs of these specific customers, and are they different? We touched on that a little bit earlier. I'm going to save you the time. Then we talk about, are my customers significantly widespread, or are they a homogeneous group? And are they widespread to the point where I'm adjusting services based on who is walking through my proverbial or literal doors? Some businesses are quite diverse in who they serve, some are not. For example, let's say convenience store, and all the different sections in a convenience store are set up to service different people's needs. There are people that are going in for quick grab and go snacks. There's some people that do their grocery shopping there. There's some people that are there as repeat customers for things like lottery tickets. Recognizing that those probably aren't the same customer, and adjusting how you present what you offer to them in different physical and marketing-based spaces. That's about identifying your different customer segments. Looping this back to the avatar piece, if you're identifying different customer segments, then you can give them avatars if you want. You don't have to, you can just describe them. For the crowd, and a bit of a pause break here, for the crowd that don't have different customer segments, that doesn't make your business illegitimate, simple, small, not of note. It just means you're very directed. If you don't have customer segments and a template you're using or a person you're speaking with asks you for them, it's okay to say that's not necessary. It'd be helpful to be able to say why it's not necessary, but know that that's something you might see if your business is supporting a singular group in the population. Okay, moving forward. Talked about this a little bit. I want to talk about what their buying habits are, and with that comes their earning potential or disposable income. So you need to align the price point of your products with the buying habits in terms of day-to-day and magnitude, how much they spend for your customer. We talked more about demographic information, so you should be quantifying that. What are their anticipated age range, gender identity, marital status, family size? You can see it on the slide. I don't need to go further, but those brackets that, even if they're not 100% correct, allow you to quantify or name the sum total amount of customers in the region that you're targeting, is a really solid base for building out the volumes of product and spending you need to do. So I'm not saying it's got to be 100% right if you say your business is for individuals 25 to 45 as your primary customer, but it does give you demographic clarity on who you're serving. Then we get into the motivation. Why are they buying from you? How much preparation did they put into the purchasing process? Is it a reactive purchase? Did they do their research? If they did their research, are you keeping your business in the mind's eye of that individual during the research process? Or are you integrating your business into the research process? And do they currently buy similar products or services somewhere else? For example, are you taking a part of the market share for what already exists? And when I say market share, I mean existing business operations in your area. Or are you emerging as a new service? More people than not say they're emerging as a new service, and they're probably incorrect. I see it all the time in entertainment-based businesses where somebody says, there's no, I don't know, Nerf gun stadium, Nerf associated stadium here. I'm the only person, I don't have any competition. And I say, well, that's actually we'll call it outside of business hours leisure activity, and it's pulling consumer dollars away from or competing with things like laser tag or arcades, or even things further afield like bowling and axe throwing. So it's not about, does this exact service exist for my customer or consumer? It's what portion of their life am I attempting to conveniently and with value slot in? Once you have that information carved out, you can adequately represent where they're probably already doing business, what their existing patterns are. When I say carve out, I'm not referencing you taking business from somebody. I'm talking about you collaborating with people that you might be able to support or work with so that the entire industry in which you work can grow cohesively. It's often a productive way forward. Continue to go. Frequency is important. How often does the purchase take place? Is it one-off, or is it something habitual and daily? Bit of a more ethereal question is, what's the core benefit? What at the end of the day are you fulfilling for that person? And you'll hear about this more when we get into brand management, or how we're describing our concepts beyond the core purchase. For example, Harley-Davidson, it doesn't consider themselves to be in the motorcycle business. They consider themselves to be in the freedom business. There's intangible quality of what that product or service brings to your consumer. So having that slightly more heady description of the core value for your customer or consumer can allow you to adapt and grow your business based on its core values, not just a linear purchasing process. Talked about this a little bit earlier. Are they impulsive or are they research-based? So I know there's been crossover between these lists, but that's because every business is different. And you now have the slideshow that gives you an 11-point list on how you might describe your understanding of your customer or consumer. Like it says there, tie these in with the previously discussed demographic and geographic information, so you can tell me, based on your best estimation and research, these are my customers. And then you can build operations based on that. Doesn't mean it's going to be 100% correct. It's a prediction and a plan, but it gives you a rationale for your path forward. Now, that's great. That's who they are. We've got our people. Excellent. How do we engage them? It first starts with eliminating your biases, assumptions, and familiar patterns. I want you to acknowledge that the process we just talked about is not always through your lens and reality as a single person. You need to go out and get challenged on what you know about who your presumed customer or consumer base is, and then adjust based on what you learn. There needs to be some humility in knowing that you are a party and brain of one. You don't know how everybody else is expecting to interface with your business. So go in with an open and objective mind. That's important. We talk about cataloging customer needs and preferences. So that whole list we talked about, it should be presentable in a very manageable, even chart-based way. I'm going to tie this into something we've discussed previously, which is the process of primary and secondary market research. So this is the pre-launch space or pre-business adjustment space. And I know it's not covered in full in this video, but primary and secondary market research are just representative of work that you've undertaken to learn about a specific topic. In this case, customer and consumer behaviors. That's primary. Secondary market research is already available information that's informing your decisions. So tie the process I just described into your research process. Market research as an entire topic is different than what we're speaking about today, but those are going to be the driving entities that inform your behaviors. It's not your guesses, because they're guesses. It's important. Okay, I want to talk further about that. Primary market research and secondary market research. Those mean, I'm going to say it again, what you do and you create that brings information to your business. That means focus groups, interviews, surveys, objective, verifiable professional and personal experience, and in some instances, education. That's you compiling your notes and information you collected and presenting it to the reader. From there, secondary market research might be resources, potentially through the college, that you're compiling about other people's research and saying, this is the information I have about the people I'm serving, and then building out from there. when you're presenting this info, and this is one of the more important points in the connection between consumer and customer research and research broadly, is that you do not need a reiteration of your entire business plan as a research paper. It's not going to be productive. It's difficult to read. But what I am suggesting you do is, while you're cataloging this info, describe the tasks you undertook. Describe the learnings and core outcomes from those tasks. And that's a way for you to say to the reader, this is an informed piece of information you're reading, and here's what I learned along the way. If you're at a certain depth of business plan, and we'll keep this tied to the consumer and customer research, you can actually add footnotes about how you know something. For example, let's go back to the behavior and demographic information. Let's go back to that beach. And you had a 1-hour meeting with the representative from tourism and hospitality in your municipality. You say, this is what I learned. And then in your business plan, under market research, subtext, customer, consumer info, you might have 1-hour meeting with insert name from municipality, core learnings, anticipated open date, anticipated close date, date of cleanup, opportunities to support and sponsor, average age, partner organizations, existing businesses. Those are objective facts that you've learned through a meeting that will inform your process. And it ties into the research process, because, to bring it back, it's not about your assumptions, it's about what you've confirmed through the business plan writing process. Finally, we're getting near the end. I want to talk about the mechanisms you use to engage these consumers. So great, they're clearly identified. The research you use to find them is clearly cataloged. Now, what mechanisms are you going to use to connect with them? Is it in person? Is it web-based? Are they on social media? Is there a connection in the community, what we would call a trusted provider or supervisor? Is there an organization associated connection? Or is it something collaborative? Like, did you learn about them through a meeting that we had with myself and Ian? Whatever you're going to use to interface with those customers and consumers needs to be verified, intentional, and repeatable. It can't all be just throw it out and check, throw it out and check. You need to have a defined amount of time through which you're going to use one of these systems, check the results, and adjust accordingly. But stick to a plan that you've created that involves timelines, involves frequency of delivery, and you move forward based on what you learn. There's no point steering a ship entirely different directions, trying to see how to get it to go straight. You're better off just adjusting over time as you move forward. Those are the mechanisms to engage. I don't need to get into the ways you're going to engage with your customer. They're pretty easy to determine. But I am going to talk about some of the intangible skills and points of relevance you can use when we're moving forward. And that is, relevance is the right term. Is my approach to engaging my customer relevant? This ties back to all the previous information. For example, is it in a space and place where they engage, and how do I know? Is it at a time of day or a frequency per week or month that works for them, and their eyes, ears, and senses are targeted at where I'm putting it? For example, there should not be a consumer base in an older demographic aligned with a cutting-edge, new wave version of social media. You have a rift then, presumably. I don't have the market research on this, so I'm up to be challenged, but I don't think you want your retirement home advertising devoted to engaging the consumer, the individual presumably to retire or reside in that home, with TikTok. I mean, if you have an ad about their child or their guardian or supporter learning about somebody that they might support by using the services of a retirement home, and that's somewhere like Facebook or the radio or aligns with that demographic for your consumer, that's not unreasonable. But this is why we talk about consumers versus customers. If your advertising or engagement with that advertising and engagement with that customer, the purchaser, is where they find it, and with the consumer is somewhere else, that's just nuanced practices in consumer and customer engagement. That all ties back to being relevant. Number two, mastery. Don't use tools you don't understand. And if there's a rift between what you know you should be using and your understanding of the use of that tool, you owe it to yourself and the potential success of your business to build that skill set. And there's trainings available, both paid and for free. And you can get confirmation of your understanding of the system through the provider itself. Use these customer service spaces, use the branded, verified YouTube pages to learn about how to master a specific mechanism to engage with customers and consumers. Number 3, be consistent, which means you need to show clarity on when I should expect to hear from you. If it's 3 social media posts a week between 4:30 and 8:30 p.m. on weekdays, so that it's when people are winding down or when they're together as a family unit, you need to predetermine that and stick to it for the amount of time you've allocated, let's say 3 months. And you can take that data, learn and grow in terms of customer engagement. I'm suggesting you be authentic, where there's probably I'll say values-based or individual motivation-based reason you're in the business that you're planning to get into. Let that shine through. And if there's a total gap in your ability to be authentic around your interest and enthusiasm for your business, some reflection and introspection might be important. But if you can bring your authentic self to how you promote and engage with your customer or consumer base, you're going to be better off. And if you're having a challenge with that, you need to look at why. And finally, honestly, this can be in operation as much as in promotion and engagement. But if there are mishaps, if there are gaps, if there are growing pains, be clear with people on the reality of your business as you move forward. You don't have to cover up mistakes. You don't have to pretend your business is something it's not. Be honest about your limitations in terms of customer service during operation, and people will be honest and respectful back. Finally, that's session 2 in the books. If you have questions, plans, there's opportunities to share. Admittedly, this slide is designed for the interpersonal space, but what I'm going to do is click back to, there it is, the title slide, and say, if there's anything about that you want further information discussing, and I'll stop sharing my screen, we're here for it. And I trust that you have my contact information that your team at CNA can make available digitally through this media. And beyond that, Ian, I really appreciate your time. It's been productive, it's been informative. And if there's anybody clicks through to you through this video that wants to reach out to me, I trust you'll point them in the right direction.
Will do. And thanks again for doing the presentation here today, Ted. Really appreciate it. And folks, that's pretty much it for today's episode. Keep an eye out for the next workshop, which is Building Your Network and Supporting CAST, happening on February 22nd, 2023. So thanks again, Ted, and have a great day.
Thank you, Ian. All the best, folks. Have a good one.